Hey, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to Guys That Magic. We are back with an upgrade video for a wonderful precon that David did. This is the Tinker Time upgrade. Before we saw David's $100, now we're moving on to the $300. David, why don't you give me a recap and talk to me about your deck a little bit?
Yeah, so Tinker Time is a deck that really cares about generating a lot of artifacts, specifically artifact tokens. For the $100 video, I did decide to switch up the legendary creature that's going to be helming the deck. So instead of running with Gimbal, we are going to be running with Rashmi and Ragavan. And Rashmi and Ragavan, they really care about being able to have like a large number of artifacts in play. They don't necessarily care too much about whether or not it's an artifact or an artifact token per se, but I figured the best way to get a ton of them into play is still to play around with artifact tokens, and we kind of focus a little bit more on a treasure theme for this deck.
Yeah, man. I mean, to be honest with you, I kind of saw what you did with the 100 and, spoiler, we kind of did a little bit of a $100 precon upgrade battle the other day, and the amount of artifacts that you were producing was just aggressive.
I mean, that is definitely the plan of the deck. We want to make sure that we have a ton. That way, our commander can just rip things for free off the top of our opponent's libraries. And for the most part, that's going to be how we continue with the 300. We do have a couple of other pieces included in the 300 that are going to be some nasty bits. Possibly provide some additional ways for us to hurt our opponents or for us to win the game. So.
Awesome. Well, first things first, let's go ahead and throw up on the screen everything that you've basically threw in for the 100. We'll throw that up there for a quick second. And then we'll go ahead and throw up everything that you had removed from the 100. Obviously, we do have some links in the description down below. If you want to watch that $100 video, I highly recommend it because it definitely will probably play into this $300 upgrade.
Oh, absolutely. This is pretty much just going to be a direct continuation. I liked the theme of the 100, so I decided to kind of just continue it for the $300 list. If that is something that's interesting to you, though, if $100 is more in the realm of your budget, definitely still check this one out because there might be some pieces in here that you would probably like to throw in the 100, maybe sub some of those upgrades out, but definitely make sure that you check out both videos.
Awesome. Well, let's go ahead and talk to me about these new additions you put in here.
Yeah, so the first couple of editions, essentially this deck doesn't necessarily care about what kind of artifacts are in play, and I wanted to lower the curve as well as kind of up our overall mana production by a decent amount. So the first three creatures we're going to talk about here are basically just going to be little mana dorks that are going to help our deck function a little bit better. The first of which being Ornithopter of Paradise. This is 2 mana for an artifact creature Thopter. It's a 0/2 with flying, and you can tap to add 1 mana of any color. So it's kind of like a more expensive version of a Bird of Paradise. However, it is also an artifact, which is what our commander cares about, and then helps us to be able to generate mana of any color, which is really important with our commander. Silvermere and Coppermere are both included in this list. These are both 2 mana. They're both 1/1 artifact creature mirrors. Silvermere can tap for a blue mana, and Coppermere can tap for a green mana. So same kind of thing here, just helping to make sure that we get our commander out as soon as we possibly can, and that way we're also counting up on our artifact count.
I love it, man. What else you got in here?
Well, we decided to throw in 2 big dragons because who doesn't love dragons? And dragons love treasures. So much so much synergy there. The first card is Hellkite Tyrant. This is 4 and 2 red for a creature dragon. It is a 6/5 with flying and trample. It says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, gain control of all artifacts that player controls. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control 20 or more artifacts, you win the game. That second clause on this card is actually very achievable in this list. So it is something that your opponents are going to have to keep an eye out for. Plus, stealing all of our opponent's artifacts whenever this hits them is just wonderful.
Yeah, this is actually really terrifying to see because the last precon upgrade we did, you had a card that was kind of similar to winning the game on your upkeep, and you were able to achieve that. And so now I'm just having flashbacks.
Yeah, goofy alternative win conditions are they're a thing, and sometimes they pay off. Another one of the big dragons that we're going to throw in this list is Old Gnawbone. This is 5 and 2 green. He's a total of 7 mana for a legendary creature dragon. It's a 7/7 with flying, and it says whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, create that many treasure tokens. So wonderful treasure production on this card. And then also on top of that, he's a 7/7 with flying, so he's going to be able to push in for quite a bit of damage.
Yeah, this is a classic card to add into any green deck wanting treasures.
Another one of the big dragons in this list is Ancient Copper Dragon. This is a bit more on the expensive side, but I mean, we are playing around with a $300 budget and we wanted a treasure theme, so why not throw in the Haymaker itself? This is 4 and 2 red for a total of 6 mana. It is a creature Elder Dragon. It is a 6/5 with flying, and it says whenever it deals combat damage to a player, roll a d20. You create a number of treasure tokens equal to the result. I love this card. I actually have been able to roll that 20 on the d20 before, and oh my goodness, it is the best feeling in the world.
Yeah, it is honestly good feeling for you. I've seen the other side of that, and it does not feel good.
Yeah, it basically sets you up where you're just like, mana doesn't matter anymore. And then, of course, we have the King of Treasure, and this is Dockside Extortionist. For 1 and a red, you get a creature Goblin Pirate. It is a 1/2 that says whenever it enters the battlefield, you'll create X treasure tokens, where X is the number of artifacts and enchantments your opponents control. So this being another one of the really expensive includes in this list. However, he is down a little bit in price at this point, and I did have enough budget left over in this list to throw him in the 300. Plus, this is a treasure-based deck, and this is probably the best treasure-based creature in the game.
Yes. Any time I feel like anyone plays a red deck, regardless of what you're trying to do, I feel like Dockside should go in there.
Probably the best red creature in the entire game, and I would put it in probably the top 5 creatures across all colors. Moving away from the dragons, we do have a couple of other creatures in this list that are going to help us out with our artifact token production. The first of which being Adrix and Nev, Twin Casters. This is a card that is 2, a green, and a blue for a total of 4 mana. It's a legendary creature Merfolk Wizard. It's a 2/2, and it has Ward 2. It also says that if 1 or more tokens would be created under your control, twice that many of those tokens are created instead. This is really great because all of our treasures are basically just going to come down with an additional treasure. So anytime we would make 1, we'll make 2 instead.
I don't like this already.
And then, of course, the king of artifacts himself, we have Urza, Lord High Artificer here. This is 2 and 2 blue, a total of 4 mana. It's legendary creature Human Artificer. It is a 1/4 and says whenever it enters the battlefield, you'll create a 0/0 colorless construct artifact creature token with. This creature gets +1/+1 for each artifact you control. That's going to be a big boy. Urza does so much more, though. So it also says that you can tap an untapped artifact you control to add a blue mana. And he also says that you can pay 5 mana, shuffle your library, exile the top card of it, and then until end of turn, you may play that card without paying its mana cost. Everything about this card does exactly what our deck wants to do. It provides us with a huge beater or blocker if we need to. It makes it to where all of our artifacts can tap for a blue, and we don't have to sacrifice our treasure tokens to do that. And then lastly, we can just kind of wheel off of them and really start going absolutely insane with our deck. This gives us additional utility as well for anything that we might be producing that's not a treasure. So any of those like food tokens or clue tokens, we can start tapping those down to wheel off of his third ability. Urza is a card that if you do end up playing it, your opponents are going to have to kill it immediately.
I'm noticing that with a lot of the things in your deck so far.
And then moving on to start to wrap up the creature package, at least, we have Reckless Fireweaver. This is 1 and a red for a creature Human Artificer. It is a 1/3, and it says whenever an artifact enters the battlefield under your control, it deals 1 damage to each opponent.
Okay, well, surely I don't like where this is going at all. But I can only imagine what the last creature you're putting in here is going to do.
All right, and then to round out this creature package, you're going to be throwing Kibu Uktabi Prince in as well. This little monkey is 2 and a green for a total of 3 mana. It's a legendary creature, Monkey Noble. It's a 2/2. You can tap it, and it says each player creates a colorless artifact token named Banana. With tap it, sacrifice it, and add either a red or a green mana to your mana pool, and you gain 2 life. So kind of a cool little, like, not quite a treasure token, but still an artifact that'll produce mana for us. And then also net us some life in the case that we need that. He also says whenever an artifact an opponent controls is put into the graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control that's an ape or a monkey. And that part is actually kind of oddly relevant because our commander is actually a monkey. So this is a way for us to bump up our commander by a little bit. And then lastly, he says whenever Kibo attacks, the defending player sacrifices an artifact. So in the case that they don't have any bananas, we can start to wipe up any of their mana rocks. So say, for example, our opponent may have a soul ring in play. Great target for that.
No, yeah, this is really good. I think that, especially with this being in the 300, I think in higher level content, people are definitely playing with more artifacts. So the fact that They're probably sacrificing a whole bunch of treasures or at least clues or stuff like that, and this will definitely pump your monkey up and also your commander.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I love the creatures you threw in here. Did you throw any other spells?
Yep, we have one instant that is going to be included in the $300 list, and this is Prismari Command. So this is one, a blue, and a red for an instant that says choose two. It says it deals 2 damage to any target. Target player draws 2 cards, then discards 2 cards. Target player creates a treasure token and destroy target artifact. So you're going to be able to do 2 of those. I just love the flexibility of a card like this, especially just given this energy. If we need to, this makes a treasure token for us. It helps us to filter out our hand, potentially kill a small creature, or deal with one of our opponent's artifacts. So just a great card all around. And then our last big card in this list is Bootlegger's Stash. This is 5 and a green for an artifact. It says lands you control have tap to create a treasure token. So we're not necessarily increasing mana by doing so, but if we do happen to have maybe some mana that is still left up, maybe on our opponent's instep, we can tap that down, create a couple treasure tokens. That way it's like we're kind of saving that mana for later, while also still feeding into the strategy of this deck.
No, I love this card because this does a couple things in my mind. I feel like it does exactly what you said, but at the end of the day, especially since you're playing blue in this deck, if you're holding up blue mana, somebody thinks it's a counter spell, they don't want to play anything, and then at the end of their turn, boom, treasures.
Exactly that. So it allows us to kind of like save our stuff for a later turn.
All right, well, I do like that. Did you throw anything else in here to help with the mana base?
I did. So we are going to be including all 3 of the talismans that work for these colors. So Talisman of Curiosity, Talisman of Impulse, and Talisman of Creativity. These are all 2 mana for an artifact. They tap for a colorless mana, or they can tap for one of 2 different colors of mana. But if they do, they'll deal 1 damage to you. I absolutely love the talismans. I put them in pretty much any deck that can fit them. They are my favorite cycle of mana rocks, and I know that they do have a tendency to like hit you maybe for a little bit of life over the course of a game, but for the most part, I feel that because they come in untapped, you don't have to sink any mana into them themselves. They're just such great cards to just be able to hit play and immediately do what they need to do.
Don't worry about it, man. You got Kibu. Just sacrifice a banana. All right, well, speaking of the mana base, what'd you do to the lands?
We've got a couple of lands we're going to be throwing in for the $300 list. This is really just kind of to help smooth out the mana base by a little bit. The first one here that we're going to talk about is Bark Channel Pathway. So this is the green-blue pathway. Just provides a little bit more flexibility. Similarly, we're also going to be throwing in Crag Crown Pathway, and that is the red-green pathway. Like I said beforehand, just kind of same similarities there. And that you can play it for whatever side you need that's more important given the circumstance. We're going to be putting in Hinterland Harbor in this list. It says it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control either a forest or an island, and then it'll tap for a green or a blue. Rootbound Crag does the same kind of thing. It enters the battlefield tapped unless you control a mountain or forest, but it'll tap for either a red or a green. And then Sulphur Falls is the blue-red version of those cards. So all 3 of them, they're the check lands for this color combination. All of these checklands do a great job of helping to make sure that we have the specific colors that we need to make our deck really turn on and hum. The last card here is the Ketria Triome. This is a land, forest, island, mountain. It enters the battlefield tapped, but it can tap for either a blue, a green, or a red. And in the case you don't need it, it does have a cycling ability where you can pitch it for 3 mana.
David, I love the additions. Terrifying. To think that I thought you maxed out your artifact, creation potential with the 100. I should have known better.
This deck really does have the ability to make an absolute ridiculous number of treasures.
Well, unfortunately, I do know that you did add some amazing cards. I do know that with additions comes deletions. So I guess before we get into cuts, did you cut anything from the $100 list?
I did. So I included Drafna, founder of LatNam, in the $100 list. We'll go ahead and post a picture of him up on the screen. Drafna is a really interesting card, and there are a couple of cards included in the Precon that I thought would really synergize with him. However, probably the biggest payoff that I at least wanted with this card, I ended up removing in the 300, and it just felt like as we started making more changes, draft day actually started to become a little bit worse and worse with the deck as we started focusing more on the treasure production side of things and not necessarily just like getting a ton of artifacts in play.
All right. Well, let's go ahead and get into the $300 deletions. What did we cut?
First off, we are going to cut Gimbal Gremlin Prodigy. This is the face commander of the Precon whenever you first take it out of the box. So Gimbal is 2, a green, a blue, and a red for a legendary creature Gremlin Artificer. It's a 4/4, and it says artifact creatures you control have trample. It also says at the beginning of your end step, create a 0/0 red Gremlin artifact creature token, and then put X +1/+1 counters on it, where X is the number of differently named artifact tokens you control. With us really driving in with just treasures specifically, Gimbal doesn't actually do much for this list. And coming in at a 5 mana creature, he's a little on the slower side as well.
Well, it is always sad to see the face commander of a deck go, but to be quite honest with you, I love the fact that you went this route anyway. So goodbye, Gimbal.
Yeah, we cut a couple of other creatures in here as well. We did get rid of Thopter Assembly. This is a 6 mana card. It's an artifact creature Thopter. It's a 5/5 with flying. It says at the beginning of your upkeep, if you control no Thopters other than Thopter Assembly, then you'll return Thopter Assembly to its owner's hand to create 5/1/1 colorless Thopter artifact creature tokens with flying. This is kind of an expensive and slow card, and I don't know. I just felt like it doesn't really do a whole lot, even whenever it's doing what it wants to be doing. Chances are, I mean, like, this is just 6 mana for a 5/5 that's probably going to end up eating removal or serving as just like a blocker in most games. It's just a little too slow for me. Master of Ethereum is the other creature that we're going to be removing from the list. This is 2 and a blue for an artifact creature, Vidalcan Wizard. It is a star, and it says its power and toughness are each equal to the number of artifacts you control. And it also says other artifact creatures you control get +1/+1. Our list actually doesn't have very many artifact creatures in it, so the second ability here doesn't do much for us. So aside from that, I mean, he really just kind of serves as a big beater, but without any additional abilities, he's just going to get chump blocked all day long and doesn't really do a whole lot. All right, and we are going to also be removing the Planeswalker that came inside the list. This is Saheeli Sublime Artificer. She is 1 and 2 hybrid of Izzet mana, so a total of 3. She is a legendary Planeswalker Saheeli. She enters with 5 loyalty and says whenever you cast a non-creature spell, create a 1/1 colorless servo artifact creature token. She's got a -2 that says target artifact you control becomes a copy of another target artifact or creature you control until end of turn, except it's an artifact in addition to its other types. I just felt like for the most part she wasn't super relevant. The servos are nice, however, we don't actually get a ton of them. Our deck is pretty creature heavy. So we're not going to really be doing a whole lot with those. They might sit around as just like chump blockers, but they don't have flying, which I feel like is really important, especially whenever you're playing these decks up against each other. And then her -2 ability, I mean, I can make something, I guess, into another treasure token, or I can make my treasure token into something, but there aren't really a ton of artifacts in this list that I really want to copy.
Yeah, I feel like this is a really good card to be in the deck if you have Gimbal. But since that's not the direction that the deck is going, I think this was a pretty easy cut.
Yeah, I mean, she's a good card in her own right, just she's kind of not fitting the list for us. Up next, we're going to be removing some of the instants and sorceries. We are going to be removing Masterful Replication. This is 5 and a blue for an instant. It says choose 1. The first mode here says create 2 3/3 colorless golem artifact creature tokens, and the second mode says choose target artifact you control. Each other artifact you control becomes a copy of that artifact until end of turn. This is 6 mana for an instant. This is incredibly expensive for essentially 6 power and 6 toughness on the first mode, and then another kind of like copy effect on the second. This is just way too expensive for this. Spell Swindle is another card we're going to be cutting here. I know that there's a lot of people who are probably going to question why I am removing this because it does make treasures, but it is 5 and 2 blue for an instant that says counter target spell. It says create X colorless treasure artifact tokens, where X is that spell's converted mana cost, and then it explains what treasures does. I actually don't like this card at all. I don't care about the upside. I know that it's relevant for our list, but a 5 mana counterspell is incredibly taxing. And if we are keeping this up in our hand, we're probably not playing out our turn. So this is just really expensive. And ultimately, even with all the upside, I cut it from the list.
I mean, I can't blame you, man. I mean, to hold up 5 mana is just a bit aggressive. I think in any deck, granted, I do understand what you're saying. about it making those treasure tokens. But I think with what you've added from the 100 and now the 300, I don't think you'll have an issue with tokens at all. So I think this was a good cut.
And then we are also going to be removing Echo Storm. This is 3 and 2 blue for a sorcery. It says whenever you cast this spell, copy it for each time you've cast your commander from the command zone this game. You may choose new targets for the copies. It says create a token that's a copy of target artifact. This list or this precon had quite a bit of these like copy style effects. Now, given that this one doesn't actually have to copy something that we control, we can copy one of our opponent's artifacts. And then like the storm aspect of this is also kind of neat, but this is still a 5-mana sorcery that has the potential to do nothing.
Get it out of here.
And then the last card we're going to be cutting here is Stroke of Genius. This is X2 and a blue. For an instant that says target player draws X cards. This isn't a bad card if you have a ton of mana for you to sink into it, which I guess this deck does have the ability to generate a lot whenever it comes with those treasure tokens, but I don't really care much for this card. I would rather be spending my mana elsewhere or just be drawing cards more efficiently with other cards. And then we are going to be removing a couple of artifacts from the list as well. The first artifact we're going to be removing here is Fractured Power Stone. This is 2 mana for an artifact that you can tap to add 1 mana to your mana pool. It also has a second ability where you can tap it and roll the planar die. Activate this ability only anytime that you could cast a sorcery. I did keep this in the 100 because I figured, you know what, it's a mana rock and it's an artifact, so I guess both of those are relevant. For the 300, however, we're going to be putting the talismans in, so they just do everything that this card does, but much better. Similarly, I'm also going to be removing Gruul Signet. This is 2 mana for an artifact. You can pay 1, tap it, and add both a red and a green to your mana pool. I do prefer the talismans. This is a card that I have to sink mana into in order to get mana back out of, so it's not really netting me like really mana positive. It's still only actually generating 1 for me. I just prefer the talismans. And then I'm also going to be cutting Skyclave Relic. This is 3 mana for an artifact. It has Kicker 3, and it does have Indestructible. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, create 2 tapped tokens that are copies of Skyclave Relic, and then you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. I understand why this card was originally included in this list, because it can make it a token copy of itself. 6 mana for a mana rock is not good. Even 3 mana for a mana rock is really not my favorite. So this just moves a bit too slow for me, and I do think the talismans, once again, are just better.
Yeah, I do like Skyclave Relic, but it's like you said, man. I mean, paying 6 mana on 1 turn to create 2 tapped tokens of this and then just having this on the field, never really enjoyed it.
Some of the other artifacts we're going to be cutting here, the first of which being Combine Chrysalis. This is a green and a blue for an artifact. It says creature tokens you control have flying. It also says that you can pay 2, a green and a blue, to tap it, sacrifice a token, and create a 4/4 green beast creature token, activate only as a sorcery. I'm not going to lie, I actually was really tempted to keep this in the list. I feel like for the most part, however, it is a little bit slow. So this does give us some stuff to do with those treasure tokens in the case that we need creatures and we just happen to have a ton of tokens laying around. We can turn those tokens into creatures. It's kind of mana intensive. You got to pay 4 mana for it. You can only do it once per turn. It's just not the fastest generating engine. Up next, we have Bloodforged Battle Axe. This is a single mana for an artifact equipment. It says the equipped creature gets +2/+0. It also says whenever the equipped creature deals combat damage to a player, you create a token that's a copy of Bloodforged Battle Axe. And it has an equip cost of 2. This is a pretty neat card. It allows us to push in for a little bit more damage and then eventually kind of like start pumping up the rest of our team. Ultimately, however, I did decide to cut this. I just feel like the +2/+0 on this. It's a pretty minor buff, and yeah, this card can snowball out of control, but I just felt like for most of the time that I play this doesn't really do a whole lot. So it just really wasn't providing much utility here.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like, I like this card and I hate this card. I think it does really good things, but never in a timely manner.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you on that. I feel like this is a card that like it reads really well, but the more that I play with it, the more I kind of realize it doesn't actually do much over the course of a game. Up next, we have Inspiring Statuary. This is 3 mana for an artifact. It says non-artifact spells you cast have improvise. It's kind of another neat little ability in here. This was another card that I wasn't really like super stoked to remove. However, in order to make room for that $300 budget, this is a card that I did end up getting rid of. It's another card that 100% I can see sticking around in the list. So just kind of a personal choice on this one. And then the last artifact that we're going to be cutting from here is Spine of Ishsa. This is 7 mana for an artifact. It says whenever it enters the battlefield, destroy target permanent. It also says whenever it's put into a graveyard, return Spine of Ishsa to its owner's hand. This is a really cool card. If you are able to make copies, if you're able to bounce this thing back and forth or flicker this thing, or if you do happen to have maybe some artifact sack ability where you can sacrifice this to put it back in your hand. The problem here, however, being is our deck really doesn't include any of those. So this kind of just felt like it was a one-time use, super expensive removal piece. And ultimately, it wasn't doing enough for me. Anytime in playtesting that I had this in my hand, I wanted to draw literally anything else.
Yeah, this is a hard one to see you cut, but at the same time, you really can't argue the point you just made. So
Moving on from there, we are going to just be talking about some of the lands. I did cut Cinderglade from this list. It's a land mountain forest. You can tap for either a red or a green. It says it enters the battlefield tapped unless you control 2 or more basic lands. I do feel like as we upgraded the mana base, this is just a card that gradually is going to be faded out. Cinderglade is really not that great of a land. The potential for it to still enter the battlefield tapped means that this is not something that I want to see in my opening hand. So I'm just not a big fan here. Similarly is Terramorphic Expanse. This is a land that you can tap to sacrifice it, search your library for a basic land card, put it on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle your library. I do feel like these kinds of cards, Terramorphic Expanse or Evolving Wilds, the better your mana base gets, the less you need those cards. So as we improve it, it's just going to be pushed out. I'm also going to be removing all 3 of the temples from this list, so that being Temple of Mystery, Temple of Epiphany, and Temple of Abandon. We'll just put all 3 together for you since they're a cycle. They all enter the battlefield tapped, and whenever they do, you'll be able to scry 1. Scrying 1 off this is nice, but not super relevant in this kind of list. And then lastly, they can all tap for 1 of 2 different colors of mana. I'm just not a big fan of tapped lands, and these always are going to enter the battlefield tapped. It kind of messes with my overall like tempo, and I would rather be playing honestly a basic over these.
yeah, anytime I'm doing an upgrade and I see enters the battlefield tapped, it is gone.
And then lastly, we are going to be removing 2 basic lands, 1 mountain and 1 forest, and that's just to make room for some of our more upgraded cards for our mana base.
David, what a beautiful $300 upgrade. The cuts were masterful as always. The additions were just as splendid. Really excited to see this deck in action for our Precon upgrade battle later. Any last and final thoughts on this deck with these additions?
If you like playing around with treasures, this might be a deck for you. If you like playing around with like non-traditional artifact-based decks, this might also be a list for you. I do think the deck is pretty interesting and has the ability to make a ton of mana, massive amounts of treasure tokens. So all in all, pretty fun build.
All right, well, David, you were given $300 of some fancy Monopoly money. Out of that $300, where are we looking?
As of the time of this recording, this list did come up to just about 300. I think we were like $1 or 2 short. But all in all, we were right at that budget.
Nice, man. Well, way to keep it in budget. I greatly appreciate that. I know the boys will appreciate that. Normally, maybe we might cheat with an extra dollar or 2 here and there. But that's awesome. Well, that is it for David's Tinker Time $300 upgrade. Thank you guys for sticking around. Please do make sure to go down below, give us a like, give us a comment. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, while you're down there commenting, let us know what you like that David added. Let us know what David should have added with a bigger budget. Also, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and on Twitter. It is @GuysThatMagic for all of those. And as always, thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned for the other 300s and have a great day.
Later.